Tonight, lessons from the past, the challenges ahead, as we mark this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation.
We're here to sing your song.
Stories shared from coast to coast to coast.
We were witness to the darkest time in Canada's history.
The names of thousands never to be forgotten. Day one of a revamped customer complaint system.
They're going to make it a lot easier to make decisions. There's a huge backlog right now.
Smoothing out a bumpy ride for airline passengers. Plus the reality of a decrepit encampment.
I have a bunch of rats running around, no running water.
Broken promises to fix a homeless crisis.
CTV National News with Sandy Ronaldo.
Good evening. A poignant day to reflect on survival and loss on this third annual National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, remembering the Indigenous children who never made it home from residential schools and those still living with the scars. Emotional ceremonies across the country in Nova Scotia.
We need to commemorate and honor what has happened here.
Montreal.
Today, when we sing, we're going to be giving a voice to those that they tried to silence.
A sunrise service in Toronto.
To acknowledge our children that never made it home.
Even at sporting events like the Jays game. A moment to reflect. And weaving through Parliament Hill, a banner containing the names of children lost but never forgotten. CTV's Creason Ashkate begins our coverage.
Hundreds gathered in solidarity on Parliament Hill today to remember the Indigenous children who never made it home from residential school. The names of 2,800 children listed here, but survivors have long said that number is much higher.
We were witness to the darkest time in Canada's history.
Governor General Mary Simon called for the education system to do a better job in teaching the full story.
It should reflect Indigenous histories. Certainly, our national history needs to reflect the challenges, trauma.
More than 150,000 Indigenous children were taken from their families, forced to attend church and government-run institutions since 1831. The last school closed in 1996, with many experiencing multiple kinds of abuse that is still felt to this day. As residential school denialism grows, leaders called for unity.
Double our efforts in advancing reconciliation. How? Where there's hatred, let us sow love.
While others called for stronger commitments from all levels of government.
The treaties that were signed must be upheld with recognition and honored every day.
In Saskatchewan, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took part in an awareness walk before meeting with Indigenous leaders in Saskatoon.
It was important for me that I come out with my son Hadrian because I wanted him to understand.
Today is about the residential school survivors, their families, and also the children that didn't make it home.
While events were held across the country to mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a new poll shows that nearly half of Canadians won't do anything to recognize the day. Sandy.
Creason in Halifax. Thank you, Creason. Residential school survivors also attended an event in central Nova Scotia, and that is where we find CTV's Hafsa Arif.
On the ground that carries the pain of many, today music, laughter, and tradition echo. At the site of the former Shubenacadie Residential School, dozens came together to remember, share, and celebrate Indigenous culture and heritage.
I'm very proud that this is taking place on this site. This, to me, in my opinion, this place is a very sacred site.
The air filled with rhythmic beats of traditional drums, and dancers adorned in jingle dresses and regalia danced, showcasing their culture and connecting to their roots.
The ones that went to the school and they held on to the languages and they held on to the ceremonies and they protected them until it was safe to start sharing again. And this is what's going to sustain the next coming generations.
When I do go by this road to go into Truro and that, try to teach myself, don't look.
Returning to the grounds brings memories of the past for many, including Debbie Paul. For many years, she avoided the area, only returning for a memorial.
I was always ashamed. I put that away. It's not about me. It's about taking a stand. It's not about anger or anything like that with that school. But I did that walk. So after over 20 years, I did that walk.
She says returning to the grounds for truth and reconciliation is a positive step forward.
Brought so much education, so much understanding, so much love, you know, and that's what they did.
During the ceremony, they announced their goals to make the grounds of the former residential school a National Historic Site.
We need to commemorate and honor what has happened here at the former school site.
A day symbolizing truth and reconciliation and a new path forward. Community members tell me that having a day like today to come here and share their stories and their truths of the past is a form of healing. And now the community does plan to continue their cultural and traditional teachings tomorrow, which also marks the first day of Mi'kmaq History Month in Nova Scotia. Hafsa Arif, CTV News, Shubenacadie.
As Creason reminded us, 150,000 children are believed to have passed through the residential school system. The conversation about that dark time in history continues on the other side of the country in BC, where 2 years ago, a discovery stunned the nation. CTV's Penny Daflos reports.
Wave after wave of orange shirts float across the University of British Columbia campus, worn by those looking to commemorate and listen.
I think Canadians have awakened really to this, and this is a wonderful thing. This is an absolutely wonderful thing, because for so long Indigenous people have been the poorest demographic in Canada.
The intergenerational march drew thousands on the third annual day of Truth and Reconciliation.
We think about not just those who managed to live beyond residential school, but we think about those who didn't.
Similar marches took place across the province, powerful displays of solidarity and the slow process of reconciliation.
I think it needs to be a gentle process because it's an emotional process.
The symbolic gestures, whether they're the orange shirts or the lowered flags, are important aspects of today, but so too are learning and listening to some very difficult stories.
Things that happened in the residential school system was brought into our homes, so we're all affected in some way.
The unmarked graves discovered on the grounds of an historic residential school in Kamloops 2 years ago, and many more since then, have shocked the public and led to this pivotal moment in our history.
It's all multicultural here. People are witnessing and getting educated and honor and show their respect and their love and their compassion.
Acts of reconciliation on a personal level that speak heart to heart.
When I look out here and I see these shirts, it lifts my heart.
I'm so hopeful now. I'm filled with hope.
Emotions are strong on this day, and so calls for patience.
The intergenerational trauma is going to need intergenerational healing, and I see the generations here.
Penny Daflos, CTV News, Vancouver.
A progress report tonight on the calls to action, an outgrowth of the 6-volume report to Ottawa from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was released 8 years ago to address the ongoing legacy of Canada's residential school system. Among the 94 items listed, a national day to commemorate truth and reconciliation, and the protection of Aboriginal rights, including language rights. Of the 94, 13 are complete, 18 haven't been started. 32 proposed projects and 31 projects are in progress or underway. And a day like this, of course, can bring back painful and traumatizing memories. For residential school survivors and their families, there is a national toll-free crisis line available 24/7. Well, change is in the air for Canadian travelers who find themselves inconvenienced by flight cancellations and delays. The first phase of Ottawa's new sweeping overhaul to the air passenger protection regulations comes into force today. The change is meant to help clear a massive backlog of more than 58,000 passenger complaints. But as CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver tells us, some airlines are raising alarms about the reforms.
Since the start of the pandemic, flight disruptions have become a part of the flying process like never before. But now the Canadian Transportation Agency is hoping an overhauled complaint system will help clear a massive backlog.
We don't know how many complaints we will receive in the future, but this new process is an important milestone in our efforts to clear the backlog.
Ottawa has given the CTA nearly $76 million to deal with a backlog that's grown by an average of 3,000 complaints a month. The CTA says the new system is a one-stop shop with more information requested up front and a public servant assigned to follow the case from start to finish, a process that should now see a decision within 90 days.
Those decisions are going to start happening a lot faster, and I think that's very good news for consumers. Justice denied is justice delayed. People are waiting a couple of years in some cases to hear back on their complaints. That's just way too long.
The streamlined complaints process is the first part of Ottawa's overhaul to the Passenger Rights Charter, which is expected to come into force next year. Among the anticipated changes, fees imposed on airlines to help recover the cost of handling customer complaints.
The airlines have been very aggressive. They want basically to recoup as much profitability as they lost in the pandemic as quickly as they can. So just put those airplanes out, fill them up, and if we have a problem, we'll just deal with that in the complaint process.
While regulation changes will help reduce complaints, passenger advocates believe the government needs to get tougher and act faster.
Currently, we have a system where it is more profitable for airlines to break the law than to follow the law. And the government is just doing some window dressing, but not actually doing what needs to be done.
WestJet CEO was in Ottawa this week, pitching to politicians that compensation for flight disruptions shouldn't be up to the airlines alone, and that some of the pending reforms, Sandy, could impact aviation safety and prices.
All right, Annie, thank you. And Annie is at Ottawa's Macdonald-Cartier International Airport. Well, after a rare Saturday session, the U.S. has avoided a total shutdown of the federal government for at least 45 days.
It's been a day full of twists and turns, but the American people can breathe a sigh of relief.
At the 11th hour, just before current funding expires at midnight, the House passed a spending bill with Republican Kevin McCarthy breaking the deadlock by turning to the Democrats. The fix is short-term, but saves Americans from losing access to programs and services they rely on. Both houses of Congress have passed the bill. And New York's governor says yesterday's torrential downpours that swamped New York City with dangerous flash floods reflect the new normal of climate change.
This was the kind of rain that was once unimaginable. We called them once-in-a-century storms. But this is the third time since I was sworn in 2 years ago I've had a once-in-a-century storm.
Almost 20 centimeters of rain fell on some parts of the country's most populous city, turning streets into rivers and shutting down public transportation and air travel. A state of emergency declared yesterday will remain in place for the next 6 days as the city dries out from one of its wettest days ever. Coming up, waiting on empty promises.
Laura, I'm worried about you.
Encampment demolished and no place to call home. Plus, mix love and laughter and you have a perfect match. As the temperature drops and the nights get longer, time is running out for the former occupants of a homeless encampment in Abbotsford, BC. Months after it was dismantled by the province, there is still no sign of the temporary shelter promised to house those who were evicted. CTV's Michelle Brunaro reports on the promise and the reality.
Laura, I'm worried about you.
27-year-old Laura lives in the bush in Abbotsford, but it wasn't supposed to be this way.
Winter's coming and not having our trailer anymore. It's going to be a lot harder for us to stay warm.
When we first met Laura 6 months ago, her home was a decrepit trailer at a notorious crime-ridden encampment called Lonzo.
I have a bunch of rats running around. It's no running water.
Back then, CTV News reported the concerns of police and the community about the violence, fires, and crimes in the camp and surrounding area. A few months later, the province promised action, shutting down the camp.
so that construction can start on a new 50-unit shelter that will house people experiencing homelessness.
The new shelter is supposed to be open by year's end, but there is no sign of construction underway at the site, and that's got outreach workers concerned.
The cold weather coming up, people are getting very worried about where they're going to be able to stay.
But the province says site work will begin in a few weeks and maintains modular housing units being built elsewhere will be at the Lonzo location and open by year's end. When the Lonzo camp shut down, some of the people ended up here at this camp just off Clearbrook Road. There's now about 20 people living here.
We've also seen an enormous increase in the number of people camping at other Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure lands.
The province says before Lonzo was shut down, everyone was offered shelter, but an outreach worker says there simply were not enough beds available to go around.
Maybe get an outreach team to come here and bring you something?
Laura did leave Lonzo for a bed in the shelter, but she didn't stay long, instead setting up a new camp just a stone's throw from the old encampment. Laura, who's been on the streets 6 years, battles addiction.
I still use fentanyl and methamphetamine.
Even with offers of help,
Outreach team's going to come and see you in about 45 minutes.
there's no easy path out of addiction and poverty. Michelle Bernoro, CTV News, Abbotsford.
Still ahead, a heritage detective.
Back in the day, the Mi'kmaq were the most prolific and famous hockey stick makers.
Amazing what you find when you least expect it. A Métis man from Saskatchewan is turning to Canada's national sport to spark conversations about the troubled legacy of residential schools. Clay Debray designed these Every Child Matters hockey sticks that feature Indigenous symbols on the shaft and an orange eagle feather on the blade.
When you score a goal in hockey, usually the stick is raised in celebration. So when that stick is raised in celebration, that eagle feather will still be the closest to our creator.
The Mi'kmaq peoples of the Atlantic provinces share a long history of making hockey sticks, and a recent investigation may have uncovered one of the earliest designs. CTV's Paul Hollingsworth explains.
Historian David Foster Carter studies and showcases this treasured hockey artifact.
3 inches by 13 inches.
3 years ago, a collector from Ontario
Wanted me to do an assessment on it.
The hockey stick was sent to Nova Scotia.
It was essentially made to measure.
A forensic historic examination was launched.
I believe that the stick is the oldest known Mi'kmaq-made stick in existence.
It was likely handmade with a saw around 1896. There are other interesting clues. The handle is round.
Most sticks until the 1890s were round-handled.
Carter says this stick is an example of Indigenous craftsmanship from a long ago era.
Back in the day, the Mi'kmaq were the most prolific and famous hockey stick makers.
The hockey stick is now on display at Halliburton House in Windsor. Carter will continue to study it and present his findings to the public.
We wish we could keep it here longer, but at least we've had it on display, so we're thrilled with that.
It's an opportunity, says Dan Boyd, to learn more about this fascinating piece of Mi'kmaq history that dates back almost 130 years.
It's very special.
And study the overall historic development of the hockey stick. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Windsor, Nova Scotia.
Coming up, finding a way to laugh.
I had a bit of breast cancer for a while, but I didn't like it.
The BC stand-up who faced down some of life's challenges. You know the saying, a day without laughter is a day wasted. Well, we leave you tonight with the story of a woman who discovered her strength as a stand-up comic by finding the strength to laugh about a potentially life-threatening illness. CTV's Adam Swatsky has her story.
Sid Bozell was motorcycling around Australia when she fell in love with a local named Ron, who 3 months later proposed to her in a pub.
And I looked at the waitress at the pub and said, "What do you think?" And she just shrugged, and I said, "Okay."
And then both Sid and Ron said I do in a ceremony staged 60 feet underground.
We used to be really cool.
But after he emigrated to Canada and they started a family, cool was replaced by convention. So Sid decided to enroll in a night school stand-up comedy class.
I was more at ease there than I had been in many years.
But comedy's late-night schedule didn't work with Sid's daytime responsibilities, so she paused her passion for decades, until cancer threatened to end her life.
Don't know how long I've got to do stuff that I really like doing, so I'd better get on that. I had a bit of breast cancer for a while, but I didn't like it.
But now cancer-free, Sid's grateful she can make light of that dark time.
And still, when I do those jokes and people applaud me for it, it still gets to me as it is now. Oh my goodness.
Sid didn't tell any cancer jokes when she wowed the judges on Canada's Got Talent, but she did reveal Ron's diagnosis.
He just recently got diagnosed with dementia.
Ron, watching in the audience, couldn't have been more proud.
That's my guy.
And tells me off camera he couldn't be more supportive of Sid sharing their story.
I want to do a show called This Is Not Your Grandma's Dementia, because I have so many people tell me, oh yeah, I know how you feel. It's way different when your partner has dementia. Way different.
And Sid has learned that in order to be the best caregiver for your partner, you must also take the best care of yourself.
Are you okay?
It's said comedy is tragedy plus time. And although not enough time has passed to include dementia in her routine yet, now is the perfect time for Sid and Ron to revisit Australia and be grateful for the love story that began there.
Have fun and do the stuff that you want to do, because you don't know when you're going to have another chance to do any of it.
Adam Sawatsky, CTV News, Comox.
And that's our newscast for this Saturday. I'm Sandy Ronaldo. We leave you now with some of the highlights from this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Good night. Until tomorrow.
I feel you here. I feel you here. I feel you here.
I was afraid I was going to die in jail.
Trapped in a foreign country.
They put a bag over your head.
A romance scam victim speaks out.
I didn't do it. I'm not a drug dealer.
W5 exposes a shocking twist.
It's unlike anything I've ever investigated before.
As a daughter fights.
They got something to hide.
For her mother's freedom.
I can't believe this. This can't be happening.
Watch W5 at a new day and time next Friday at 10 on CTV.